Hello, my name is Andy Riggs, and I'm here today to talk to you about the process of solving a complex business problem. So first, I generated a list of things that bothered me, the bug list, and as you can see, there's kind of a lot of things here. And from the bug list, I went with some ideas that I thought would be my problem that I was going to solve, but they ended up turning out to be not something that I could pursue. And mainly that happened through athletics, like trying to solve the durability of a golf ball, but there's not really anything you can do about that. And I'm not an engineer to create some kind of new golf ball. So I moved into the clarifying phase, and the first step of clarifying is to define your initial problem statement. And my problem is the number of kids in foster care. So this is something that's really personal to me and something that I'm really passionate about because I myself am a foster brother. So in 8th grade, we got our first foster care placement on the left. That's Carlos. He lived in our home for 2.5 years, and he now lives with his biological father, which was hard for our family at first because he was such a big part of our family, and like I viewed him as my brother. But he lives with his dad now, and he still visits our home, which is good. So our next placement was Henry in the middle. He is officially adopted, my baby brother. And on the right here is Annie, and that is my baby sister who's also officially adopted. So after I decided that my problem was going to be the number of kids in foster care, I made a journey map, and that basically was to find all the pain points along the way of the foster care process and try and start to figure out why there's so many kids in foster care. So my big outcome from my journey map was the biggest pain point is the fear of separation amongst people in America today. So people are hesitant to embark in the foster care process because they're afraid of separation from their kid and falling in love with their placement. Like Carlos in that situation, he going to live with his biological father, not really willing to deal with that emotional roller coaster. So the next step of clarifying would be to reframe your problem. So within these two steps right here, I realized that there's a lot of factors of how to contribute towards the big picture of the high number of kids in foster care, and a lot of little details that you can adjust to adjust the problem and make it spin in a different way. So my outcome from these problem statements is there's so many factors that go into this problem. There's so many different things that contribute to there being a high number of kids in care. So then the third step of the clarifying phase was really the biggest part of my project, and that was head and heart research. So within head research, I really felt like I didn't really need to do a whole lot because I am a foster brother and I have been for the past 5 years. So I know a lot about the foster care process, the adoption process, and a lot more. But what I did want to do is branch out from my family, like from what I have known, like get away from the Riggs family. So what I wanted to do was find stories about foster parents and their heartbreak that they've experienced. So I found this blog of this mom that I think she lived in Colorado, and she wanted to adopt kids, but she never really got the opportunity to. And she had 4 placements that ended up getting reunified with biological family, and she didn't really take that she took it to heart, and obviously it was really hard for her, but she had a really cool mindset, and that was that she now has kids across the country. She has kids that she's made an impact on that are living all over the world. So that's just really cool. She never stopped fostering. She finally got her adopted kid on her 5th placement, but she kept going with it, and as hard as it was for her emotionally, she continued the process of being a foster parent. And my first part of heart research would be to observe someone in a public setting, and because there's not really a way for me to observe foster care, what I did was reflect on the experiences that I've had throughout my 5 years as a foster brother. So what I talked about and reflected on was the things that I felt, I've seen, and heard along the way. So what I felt is the emotional roller coaster with Carlos and his potential reunification with his parents, and then potential adoption to our family, and just going back and forth through 2.5 years. It was really hard. But with Annie and Henry, what I felt is just the love and instant connection. I've instantly fell in love with these kids and view them as my siblings today. Things I've heard that have shaped my experience would be the cries of Carlos when he would have to go just for an overnight visit to visit his biological parents. That was really hard. I know if he had a say, he would want to live with my family. And then lastly, the things that I've done, I have become closer with my biological family, and realization of how fortunate I am, and become closer with my biological brothers. So then this part of the project was really huge for me. Conversations, which is the second part of heart research, And that's because like not everyone knows as much about foster care as I do. And for the individuals that I did have conversations with, they had different takeaways from the experience. So to start, I interviewed my friend Blake, actually in the car ride on the way home for fall break. He's a coworker of mine at the Inverness Club. That's a picture of where we work right there. So he had a family friend that did overseas adoption. The kid was from Russia. And he talked a lot about the negative impacts that this brought to his family friend. So this family was your typical like upper middle class, Northwest Ohio. They had 2 biological kids themselves, and they decided to try and adopt a kid from Russia. And the kid, he had a lot of issues from his experiences that he had in Russian orphanages. He came to the U.S. when he was 14 years old, so the last 12, 13 years of his life were actually like horrible. Literally, the conditions are just absolutely a living hell. So, for example, he had a really bad stealing problem, and he would steal food items from grocery stores because back home he didn't know what he was going to eat next. So now when he's in America and he has a food surplus, he would literally steal food and hide it under his bed because he didn't know the next time he was going to eat, which just absolutely breaks your heart. So another thing that Blake talked about was how it brought like this unique dynamic to his family and what they had to go through financially, emotionally, and physically for their adopted kid. And he said it like really just threw up like almost like a curveball to their family. So that was interesting. And one of the big problems that I took away from this conversation were the potential behavioral issues that kids bring into your home when you have a normal family, and how it's really out of their control because it's just what they've been through. And my second conversation was with you, Mr. Ryman, in your office hours. And I really didn't think we had a conversation about like an empathy interview. But I walked out and I was like, shit, like I think I just had a conversation for my project. So that's really important to note for me. These weren't really like formal interviews. They were just discussions and what I took away from the discussion. So you really, like you started off by saying you really didn't know anything about foster care. You didn't really know a whole lot about the process, and most people don't. So that was good. I mean, I got like a different dynamic of people that I was having conversations with. So you talked, with our conversation, we talked about like biological parents taking advantage of the system and realizing that, look, if I have a kid in foster care, I can get food stamps, I can get government housing, I can get and more benefits along the way. So that was something that we talked a lot about, and specifically with Carlos, his biological father. That's how that conversation was triggered. So that was a big problem with biological parents just taking advantage of our current system. And another problem that we talked about was the lack of control of the foster children in court. Like they really just don't have a say in the process, and they just kind of go wherever the caseworkers and the judge decide that they're best fit. My third conversation was with my lifelong best friend, Jack Kunkel. He plays college golf at University of Cincinnati. And he actually is the son, both of his parents work for Lucas County Children's Services, which is the organization that we foster through. So his family was pretty influential on mine on starting foster care and just beginning the journey of being foster parents. And Jack, he's like a brother to me. Like he's over at my house all the time. So he's been a witness to the impact that this experience has had on me personally and my family as a whole. So when I asked him why he thought there were so many kids in foster care, he talked about just the poor decision making of young people, and mainly that came to drug use. Being in Northwest Ohio, it's known that Toledo is like the intersection of the Turnpike and I-75, so it's really big sex trafficking and heroin. So that's why there's a lot of drug use within our community. And another problem we talked about was just how that there's so many kids in foster care. It's almost just like an unfortunate reality of today's world. The amount of kids that just don't have a supportive family environment. They don't have someone to tell them that to not have unprotected sex and things like that just generate the high number of kids in care. My fourth conversation was with my parents, and even though that I've lived in their house for 18 years now, I came to the realization that we had different takeaways from our journey through foster care, which I thought was really interesting. And obviously they're experts about this topic. They are foster parents. They went to all the classes to become registered and so much more. So my mom specifically talked a lot about this cycle of abuse, which I knew was prominent in today's world, but I didn't realize how big of a factor it was in the high number of kids in foster care. And basically what the cycle of abuse is if I'm a kid and let's say my biological father abuses me, when I grow up, I'm gonna do the same thing to my children because I know no different. I know no other way to raise your kid, and that's just the way that people operate and like how they raise their children because they don't know any different. And my mom also talked about how she has an anger for the kids that like have positive upbringings that really don't recognize it and almost taking for granted. Just like that's what she did when she was a kid. So she was like angry at herself because she had such a normal family and didn't really realize it. And then she talked a lot about her compassion for her biological parents with kids in care, because she just showed empathy and realized, like maybe they were abused as a child, maybe they were even a foster kid when they were a kid. So they just don't have a role model within their family to help them make positive, healthy decisions. And lastly, she talked about how if she were 17 years old and to become pregnant, her parents would be able to step in. Her older sister would be able to step in to help her out to raise her children. Whereas all these parents, like if they have a pregnancy, they have no one to turn to. They don't have a role model within their family with the same color of their skin. They don't have anyone to look up to. That's like I want to be like him. I want to be like her. So they just don't have a supportive family environment. So when they do get pregnant, there's just no other option other than putting the kid into foster care. My fifth conversation was with Jack's dad, Mr. Matt Kunkel. So he worked in children's services for 30 years, and his job was to investigate the quality of homes and to realize should I remove this kid from the home? Should I is it potential for reunification within this home? So he's seen a lot. I mean, he told me, I've seen it all with the quality of homes. So he talked specifically about a story with a kid named Brandon that he had when he said it was about 15 years ago. So Brandon's parents were using heroin like in another part of their house. And for some reason, a neighbor had called and said someone needs to investigate the home, and they just kind of knew the situation. And when Matt got there, the baby was actually trapped between his crib and his room in a heater. So the baby was actually being like burned on his arm, like burned for however long he was in there. And